Okay, so now for the main event of the evening or day, whenever you're doing this, actually binding our books. So I've got my embroidery floss, I've got my needle, got my holes punched in my book. Even though you can't necessarily see it on this video, that's okay. Binding this book is a series of wrap and run stitches, and you always alternate wrapping and running. I promise that'll make a little bit more sense here in a minute. So a lot of bookbinders have a very specific idea of where you should start your binding. Often that's in the back. So remember, I've got this, which is my back cover of my book. I'm going to come in from the second to last page, and I am going to use, see, it's hard to see this, I know, but I have 1, 2, 3 holes punched. I'm actually going to start with the third hole up on mine. So I end up with something somewhat close to the middle. And I probably gave myself too much embroidery floss, but that's okay. If you ever run out of embroidery floss, you can always just tie a weaver's knot and hide your knot somewhere. Now, because I came through the third hole on this, I'm gonna come in through the third hole on the rest of my pages. Because my pages are kind of weird sizes all together, I'm gonna do this one by one for this first stitch because there's nothing holding them together. I did indeed give myself far too much embroidery floss, but that's okay. You'll notice that some pages are much more fragile than other pages, right? That all depends on the type of paper you chose. One of the reasons we leave so much extra space with the 1/2 inch or so margin is so that things don't rip out. And then I'm going to come up through the cover. So you'll see that I always kind of nose my stitches through. I don't necessarily, I don't ever want to just stab blindly because then I'll probably punch a new hole. So I don't want to do that because once you put a hole in your book, it's there permanently. So before I do anything else, I'm going to make sure that I've pulled my embroidery floss or whatever I'm using to bind this together even. Right? I don't want there to be any extra embroidery floss hanging out in between my pages. I just want my tail at the end. I'm going to leave myself a good long tail because I'm going to have to tie a knot at the end of this. And now you can see that things are staying put a little bit better. So the first thing I am going to do is do a wrap stitch. And what that means is I am going to wrap this around my spine and come back up through the same hole. Is that right? Yeah, let's try it. So wrapping around the spine. Yep, I'm gonna come back in. And I will actually end up going back through all of these same pages that I just went through a minute ago. And it's okay if things kind of dismantle, right? as you pull things back together, you can put more tension back into it. That is okay. So let me pull this back to the front of my book. I will, I'm kind of wiggling my needle to get it through everything. I'm going to try pretty hard not to split the threads on my embroidery floss, but sometimes I can't really avoid it. Then I'm going to keep pulling, and I have my first wrap stitch. Then I'm going to do a run stitch. So a run runs along the spine. So I'll go to the next hole, and I'll try to keep this oriented like this for the rest of the video if I can. So I'll come down to this one, pull it through each page individually. Now you see why we punched all those holes. Sometimes you kind of have to coax the needle back through. Uh-oh, you guys, I split the thread on this. I'm not very happy about that. Well, I'm going to show you guys how to do this book, but I might have to rip that out later. I don't like the looks of that very much. Anyway, so I did a run, so I'll do a wrap. Again, around the spine. And come back through the same set of holes. Careful not to split my thread. Make sure it's pulled taut. I want to make sure that my spine is all pretty. So I just did a wrap, which means I need to do a run. So I'm on the back cover of my book. Remember, I've got this picture in the back, which means I'm going to come back up through the front. Going through the first set of holes is always a little bit trickier. Sometimes if you kind of wiggle it a little bit, that helps a lot. So I just did a run, which means I need to do a wrap. Then I come around the corner. Which doesn't necessarily count as a run or a wrap. But you always have to go around the corner. It'll help your book become more stable. Then I'm going to run once more. See, I've got this gap here, which means I'm going to fill it back up. Where's my gap? It's not here around the spine, it's here, so that means my next stitch is also a run. Check the tension. Right. I don't want to wrap again because it's already wrapped, which means that I run back up to my next gap. Again, these are not sewn through yet, so they're going to be a little bit finicky. All right, I'm trying not to just dent everything as I go through, but sometimes it's really hard. You can see I'm going through one by one. I'll pull back up. So that was a run, which means my next is a wrap. Coming back, then I have another run. And I'm just going through one by one and finding those holes I made previously. So I completed a run, which means I have a wrap. Run to the next stitch. Oops. And then I have actually 2 wraps to do. So I've got to go around the spine. Line this up. And around the top. Remember, this gives it a little bit more stability. Now it looks like I've got all these random gaps, right? Well, that's okay because I'm about to fill them all in. So I'm missing a stitch here, which means that is my natural next step. Lo and behold, I'm missing this stitch, which means my next step is to go back through this hole. Try not to split the fibers. Oops. And then my last step, it looks like I'm missing this here, but if you guys remember, that is actually exactly where I started. So instead of pulling all the way through the book, I'm only going to go through the back cover. So I'll pull my needle out inside the book. My hands are getting so much charcoal on them. I really regret not sealing this drawing. And then I'm going to cut my absurdly long piece of embroidery floss. And then I can tie a double knot here on the interior. So pull that down into the spine. I'm going to trim these down a little bit more, and then I can have them lay flat inside the spine. And voila, I have a bound recycled paper / collage